How's it going, everyone? Hi, Leanne. Good to see you. Welcome, Stephanie. Good to see you as well. Thanks for checking in today on the Wednesday afternoon lecture. I appreciate everybody for visiting me today. Looks like we've got a pretty good crowd. Good morning, Etta. I was looking at the grade book today and noticed you've already done your discussion board. So proud of you. Hi, Leanne. Remember, we've got a webinar tonight at 8 o'clock. Please prepare by watching the videos that I have in the webinar folder so that you'll be ready to talk about them. And we're going to find out how well you plan to live your late adulthood. I'm doing fine, Etta. Thank you very much. I hope you're doing well too. Packing up for your big move to Cincinnati. Holy cow, we're going to miss you. Okay. Get your butt there and watch those videos, Leanne. No half-stepping on me, okay? I know, right? It's always good to get ahead. By the way, the final exam will be available, let's see, Friday, April 30th at 9 a.m., and it's due the following Friday at May 7th at 11:59 p.m. Also, week 15 assignment is already available for those of you who want to get started early on next week's work, okay? I hope you do. I hope you're always welcome to drop in on my lectures later on. In fact, I had a former student drop in on one of my lectures in the 11 o'clock class today. It's always kind of nice. Hi, Brianna. Good to see you. Hi, Jay. Good to see you. Fantastic. Looks like we've got a good crowd here, so let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk a little bit about cognitive development today. That is chapter 18. So chapter 17 was physical development in late adulthood. Chapter 18 is cognitive development in late adulthood. And then next week we're going to do socio-emotional development in late adulthood and death and dying. Those will be chapter 19 and 20. Okay? Fantastic. Let's go ahead and get started. Cognitive changes in older adulthood. Now remember we talked about fluid versus crystallized intelligence, and we said one ability drops off a little bit earlier than the other. If you want to think about it, a term that this chapter uses is mechanics versus pragmatics. Okay, so what you're actually going to see physiologically in the brain is the hardware is going to start to slow down. The neurophysiological architecture, you're going to start losing synapses. Your axons are going to start working a little more slowly. You're going to have less neurotransmitters released. Those represent the cognitive mechanics. And that's the part that's going to begin declining in your 40s and 50s and really going to underpin the cognitive changes that occur as you get older. The pragmatics are the culture-based software programs of the mind, including how to read, how to write, how to speak, the things that you learned in school. So one way to think about it is mechanics versus pragmatics. And the mechanics are the part that start declining that you can't do anything about. But the pragmatics are the part that you can continue to work on and develop as you get older. Okay? Now, what's going to occur? As you get in late adulthood, your reaction time is going to slow down. It's well accepted that speed of neurological processing slows in late adulthood. This is caused by a decline in neural connectivity. We sort of hinted at this on Monday, and neurotransmitter functioning, as well as the breakdown in myelin tissue. Remember, myelin tissue is the fatty tissue that surrounds axons and speeds up their action potentials. And so these declines, the neural connectivity, neurotransmitter functioning, and breakdown in myelin tissue are linked to an increased rate in dementia and falls in older adults. I think we hinted at this on Monday as well. And your impaired visual processing speed is going to be linked to physical accidents. Remember, accidents are the 7th leading killer of people in late adulthood. What you can do to delay this slowdown, there is considerable individual variation. And if we talked with 100 of you, I bet you we would find 100 different opinions on how mental ability slows down in late adulthood. Some of you would say, oh, my grandfather or my grandmother is still sharp as a tack at 90. And some of you would say, oh, I can see my 65-year-old father slowing down. There's considerable individual variation. What you can do to slow this down is engage in high intensity workouts, play speed processing game. You know, there are tons of apps on your phone that you can play games on. I don't know about you, but I play Sudoku, and I always keep my time to see how quickly I can get through the latest Sudoku puzzle. So definitely get that cardio in and play speed processing games. Think as fast as you can. Practice thinking quickly. Now, if you remember, we talked about cognitive changes in older adulthood from the information perspective, the information processing perspective. Remember, I mentioned this all the way when we were talking about cognitive development and toddlerhood. And I suggested that you think about human beings as computers and having different sort of cognitive processes that function sort of like a computer. And we talked about attention, short-term memory, long-term memory, and we talked about those different characteristics of the memory. Now, all types of attention are going to be impaired as you go into late adulthood. Your ability to pay attention to certain aspects of your environment while ignoring others is going to decrease. This is called your selective attention abilities. Your divided attention, which is your ability to pay attention to multitask, to do two things at one time, is also going to decrease in adulthood, but mainly on difficult divided attention tasks. So if you're multitasking easy things, you're not going to see as much of a decline as if you're multitasking difficult things. Now, also your ability to sustain attention or your vigilance is also going to decline in older adulthood, especially on difficult tasks. So divided attention and sustained attention are a little bit different in that they, as long as you're not focusing on difficult tasks, we don't see as much decline in these abilities as when we focus on difficult tasks. All right, executive attention is the ability to plan, allocate attention, and compensate for errors, monitor your progress on tasks, your critical thinking abilities, okay, and your ability to deal with novel or difficult circumstances. As I told you, when my father's car breaks down these days, I have to come in and kind of help him solve these problems because it's hard for him to even focus. Oh, I need to go to a mechanic for this problem. I don't need to go to a mechanic for this problem. It's probably this as opposed to this. My dad's ability to problem solve and think is definitely declining in late adulthood. So all kinds of attention processes are going to decrease. Our ability to function with regard to attentional process, to engage in executive functioning, is going to be impaired as we move through late adulthood. Yes, I am going to talk about the cumulative stuff, Leanne. Definitely I'll have that out by next week. Okay, now, not only do we have difficulty with our attentional processes, but when we talk about short-term memory and our working memory, those are also going to show a decline in late adulthood. So your working memory is the part of your memory where you hold information that you're consciously thinking about. Remember, if I gave you a grocery list, remember we need tomatoes, bread, ketchup, toilet paper, eggs, a can of beans, and some frozen pineapple. Your ability to hold all those things in your mind is what we call your working memory. It turns out that your working memory does show a decline in older adulthood. You're more easily distracted, and your ability to process that information. So if I gave you a list of things, it would take longer for you to remember to process each of those items so that you could keep them in your working memory. Both of those things are going to slow down as you get into late adulthood. And as I suggested to you, your executive functioning, your ability to evaluate information, to think critically, changing and setting goals does decline in older adults. especially when it comes to updating memory representations that are relevant for the task at hand. So my dad's always trying to, every time I take my dad to Washington, D.C., he swears that he knows the city because he lived there back in the 60s. And he doesn't seem to realize that the streets have changed in 60 years. But my dad always seems to think that he's going to know exactly how to get around in Washington, D.C. because he remembers it from 1966. He just can't seem to update his memory representations to understand that the things he used to know are not relevant for today. And so, he's sort of a little set in his ways. We sometimes talk about older people as being more set in their ways. That relates to flexibility of thinking and mental sets. A mental set is when your brain is stuck thinking one way and you can't think outside the box. And so this flexibility of thinking, the ability to change mental sets and to switch back and forth between mental tasks, is going to decline as we get older. So all kinds of executive functioning abilities are going to decrease in late adulthood. Now, your ability to make decisions is going to remain largely intact except for new or novel situations, as I mentioned earlier in this class, which shows declines for older adults in unfamiliar domains. Okay? If you're in a familiar domain and grandpa's in a familiar domain, he's going to be able to make decisions just as well as he always did. It's only when you change things up or he's in a new situation that you're really going to start to see a difficulty with decision making. And also, remember, we suggested to you that thinking slows down when you get older. So when you're not in a hurry to make a decision, grandpa's going to show less decline in decision making ability. But when things are hurry, 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 we've got to decide now, that's also when you're going to see a decrease in these thinking abilities. You're right, Leanne, there. Older people are struggle, right? Now, a lot of older people tend to talk about having senior moments. I can't remember that. I'm going to have a senior moment. I'm going to have a senior moment, right? Turns out that older adults, they're not as forgetful as they think they are. But because they think they're forgetful, they use scaffolding strategies. So grandpa may think he's more forgetful, and that causes him to write things down. So in fact, he turns out not to forget things. Whereas you, the young kid, may say, oh, I can remember that, and you forget things because you didn't write them down. So older adults, actually, their memory isn't as bad as they think, but it does cause them to use scaffolding strategies. How old is your grandma, Leanne? Okay. So it turns out that explicit memory, crystallized intelligence, doesn't seem to decrease as much in late adulthood. So now we're talking about long-term memory. And it doesn't decrease quite as much as the speed of processing and your critical thinking abilities. And if you remember, we talked about the difference between episodic memory, which is memory for events and things that happen in your life, and semantic memory is just general knowledge about facts around the world. And if you ever talk to your grandparents, you'll notice that they can remember things that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago. And they also don't forget what a school bus is like or what broccoli tastes like. So episodic and semantic memories do not tend to decrease. And you know what? But it does, but the explicit memory is going to decrease a little bit more than implicit memory, okay? Implicit memory are those memories for how to do things. Grandpa's not going to forget how to drive the car, use the car keys, or dial a phone. That's not going to show nearly as much decline as the explicit memories do, okay? Now, also, sometimes we talk about other sort of memory strategies. Source memory is the memory for who told you something, okay, or when you have a memory. So I remember what dogs look like because I remember my dad bought me a dog. So remembering who created that memory is what's known as your source memory, knowing where you got a memory from. And then we also talk about prospective memory, which is remembering that you have to do something, right? So after class, I need to get into my son's WebAdvisor account and pay for his summer schools before he gets kicked out of his classes. That's an example of prospective memory. Now, source memory and prospective memory do show some decline in late adulthood, but only for those things that are unimportant. Grandma and grandpa are still pretty good at remembering things they have to do, like doctor's appointment, and very important source memories from earlier in their life, but only if those things are important, which suggests that your brain, remember we talked about your brain becoming less lateralized as you get older? Maybe you're forgetting things that are unimportant so you can remember things that are important. Is your brain changing and acclimating to this memory loss by allocating resources to more important things to remember? Okay. Now, do you want to maintain your cognitive abilities? We all want to maintain your cognitive abilities. The fact that you were all in school learning and getting your college education is going to help improve your abilities in late adulthood and put off the cognitive decline. We're living longer, but we're also more educated. So people are keeping their mental faculties longer than they ever did before. And one of the things that predicts cognitive decline is level of education. The higher your level of education, the slower your cognitive decline is. So hopefully with the PhD, whoop, 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 I'll keep my mind for a good long time. Okay? Now, it turns out that having a hard job also slows down age-related decline. You know, back in the day, my grandfather picked tobacco. My grandfather picked cotton. My grandfather worked at a sawmill. Very simple, repetitive, physical kinds of activities. Now today, I have 3 computer screens in me right now. I've got problem solving going on. Leanne might have a problem. Etta might have a problem. I've got to fill out paperwork for this other class. I've got to think creatively about lectures. So working in a job that requires complex working tasks also slows down age-related decline. Wow, well that's good to hear. Etta says that her grandparents were not educated but still had great memory. I wonder if they worked outside and got their cardio in, Etta. Okay, now it turns out that physical health is also associated with cognitive functioning. Having a good blood pressure, not having a heart disease or diabetes, and all of these things are associated with less cognitive decline. Now, is it actually these physical qualities, physiological measures, or is it the exercise that decreases your high blood pressure, that decreases your diabetes, and improves your heart functioning? So really, I think it's exercise is linked to a decay in cognitive decline. So how can you prevent and put off cognitive decline as long as possible? Keep going in school. Keep in school. Always doing some sort of educational activity. Make sure you get a job that really stimulates your mind. And make sure that you are exercising. Right, Etta? So maybe it was that hard country work that helped your grandparents keep their mind. Now, one sort of term we can think about, it turns out that a lot of people keep their mind, and when they start losing their mind, they're getting sort of close to death, if you will. So one way you can think of cognitive decline as a measure of how old your mind is and sort of how close you are to death. So as people start to lose their cognitive abilities, they're sort of inching closer and closer to dying. And I noticed this in my own grandma, my wife's grandma that's 101 years old. She was sharp as a tack until the last 6 months. And as her physical health has declined and she's become less less able to function on her own, she started demonstrating aspects of dementia. And so you can think of this onset of dementia as sort of the precursor to the end of life. You know, you do have a good point. We had to remember things on our own back in the day, and maybe that was something that helped us keep our cognitive decline away. But now we have cell phones, and that does all the thinking for us. That's not a bad point. Okay, so your book talks about a bunch of different studies on page 558 supporting the use it or lose it concept that mental activities can benefit the maintenance of cognitive skills. And there's lots of different research studies on different populations. One study found that Catholic priests over 65 who read books and did crossword puzzles were less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. The Victoria longitudinal studies showed that people who played bridge and used computers had a slower decline in long-term memory and verbal speed. The Baltimore Experience course showed that people who volunteered in undeserving elementary schools had a slower decline in cognitive functioning. And learning a new task like how to quilt, how to use digital photography or iPad training. I have a friend of mine, he's 71 going on 72 now. After he retired, he started taking classes to become a movie maker and make documentaries. Now, I've watched some of his shows and they're really not very good, but he's learning a new skill. And learning a new skill stretches that mind out. It creates new synapses. It causes your neurons to keep functioning and activating, and it's going to help put off the cognitive decline that leads to death. Bottom line, cognitive training can improve cognitive skills, especially for those under 85 years of age. Now, once you get up into your late 80s and 90s, these different kinds of activities aren't going to show nearly the impact that they show for people in young late adulthood. Okay? So, neurobiological changes, the neural circuits in the prefrontal cortex decline. Remember, as I suggested to you, older adults use both hemispheres. They compensate for not having good function in either lobe so that they start to work together. You're going to see an atrophy of the hippocampus. And remember, hippocampus is important for forming new memories. You get your old memories, you don't need your hippocampus, but for new memories, you need your hippocampus. And there are going to be poor connections among regions of the brain for older adults. And one thing we do know is that the cortical thickness in the frontal lobe does predict the quality of executive function. So as those neural circuits in the prefrontal cortex decline and the cortical thickness starts to go away, that's when we start to lose that executive functioning that I talked about a couple of slides back. Okay, dementia is a catch-all term used to describe a neurological disorder in which the primary symptoms involve the deterioration of mental functioning. This affects 23% of all women, 17% of men 85 years and older. Again, I suggested to you that you can reduce your risk through having a good diet, doing cardio and high-intensity workout, cognitive training, learning new tasks, doing crossword puzzles, and watching your blood pressure and your heart functioning, right? Two forms of dementia. One's called Alzheimer's, which is a gradual deterioration of memory, reasoning, language, and eventually physical functioning. It involves a deficiency in the brain messenger chemical acetylcholine. And you know what? Females are more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease because they live longer than men. So, what happens in Alzheimer's is you start to develop these plaques and these tangles in your brain, okay? And these plaques and tangles start in the area of your brain that creates acetylcholine. And these tangles and plaques, just like plaque is not good for your teeth, plaque is not good for your neurons. And it causes your neurons to die. If you look at the picture right underneath me, okay, you'll see the difference between the healthy brain and the Alzheimer's brain. And you know what? They never truly diagnose Alzheimer's until death. And then if you do the autopsy, you can see the withered brain. That is so sad, Etta, that your husband's dad has Alzheimer's, especially at such a young age. But it does cause their mental abilities to decline, and they often have emotional outbursts because as you start to lose your mental abilities, it becomes very frustrating and causes them to get angry. Now, how can we treat it? How do they treat it? From what I understand, Etta, they don't do the true diagnosis until you die and they look at the brain. MRI is going to show some shrinking of the brain, yes, but the final diagnosis comes upon death. Now, there's cholinesterase inhibitors, which magnifies the amount of acetylcholine in your brain. So acetylcholine is important for attention and memory, and so one of the treatments that they have is to give you an cholinesterase inhibitors. Cholinesterase is a molecule that eats up acetylcholine. Its job is to clean up acetylcholine that's floating around randomly in your brain. And so what you do is you take an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, and that magnifies the amount of acetylcholine in your brain. This slows but does not stop the progression of the disorder. And I hate to say this, Etta, but really at this point when you develop Alzheimer's, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't really stop. You may slow it a little bit, but you're not going to stop the progression. I'd be curious, Etta, how long is your dad's father had Alzheimer's disease? He gets a medication for depression to increase his brain work. Yeah, the weird thing is with drug medications is they are often used for multiple disorders. So some people who have attention problems take Depakote, and some people who have schizophrenia may take Depakote. And so you may have a learning disorder and you take the same drug that a person who has schizophrenia may take. So does the medication work, Etta? I'd be curious. Your grandma's developing dementia. I'm sorry, that's so sad, Leanne. Parkinson's disease is also a chronic progressive disease. It's characterized by muscle tremors, slowing of movement, and partial facial paralysis. Has anybody ever heard of the Parkinson's shuffle before? I'm going to show you a video real quick of a person with the Parkinson's shuffle. So does everybody see the screen here? Here's a person who has Parkinson's disorder, and the tremors that they have prevent them from walking like a normal person. Watch this gentleman. So did everybody notice how that fellow couldn't walk very quickly? Because he's got these muscle tremors, it actually prevents him from reaching it messes up his balance, so it becomes difficult for him to reach his legs out and walk and take full steps. And that's Parker disorder. It's triggered by the degeneration of dopamine brain-producing neurons in the brain. So you have dopamine-producing neurons in the substantia nigra, which is way down in your brain stem, and the decrease in these neurons decreases the amount of dopamine in your brain, and it causes you to have tremors, facial paralysis, and to have difficulty walking and to engage in the Parkinson's shuffle. Now, the first thing they use to treat this is this stuff called levodopa or L-dopa, and basically it works in the same way that the acetylcholinesterase, the cholinesterase inhibitors does. What it does is it causes the dopamine in your brain to be magnified. So what it does is it 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 the dopamine agonists magnify the amount of dopamine in your brain, which puts off the the symptoms. And the crazy thing is, I saw an interview with Michael J. Fox, who's a TV star that you folks probably aren't familiar with now. But Michael J. Fox would tremor and have difficulty talking. Then he took the medicine, and a half an hour later, he was talking normally again. So these dopamine medication, this dopamine agonist medication, does help for a while with people who suffer from Parkinson's. Another treatment, and I couldn't find the video to show you today, is to use psychosurgery. So what they do is they use an electrical pacemaker, insert a wire deep down into your thalamus, and stimulate the part of your brain that's supposed to be stimulated by dopamine, so that the lack of dopamine doesn't slow down your functioning. And psychosurgery, these deep brain stimulators work magically to make the symptoms of Parkinson's disease go away. Exactly, Etta. I couldn't find that video, but the gentleman turned it off and started to shake, and as soon as he turned it on, the shakes went away. Absolutely, absolutely. All right, now, people do suffer depression in late adulthood, and the most common predictors of depression in late adulthood is if you were depressed earlier, if you have poor health, if you lose people around you that are important, or you don't have social support. I remember last year, my grandmother's best friend, who I think, what was her name? Bernice. Bernice was also 100 years old, and they had been friends for 80 years. And I remember when Bernice died, we were really worried that Nana was going to die as well, because she really took that loss tough, and she really kind of spun into a little bit of a depression for a while. But she had lots of social support, and she was in good health, so she didn't stay in her little depression for too long, right? How do we treat it? With medication, psychotherapy, and exercise. You folks hearing a theme here? Exercise, exercise, exercise. I know it was tough because, everybody is too busy to call Mana, and, I have to admit, I didn't call Mana but every couple of weeks. But her and Bernice talked 2 to 3 times a day until Bernice died. And they sort of gave each other the social support that you don't get when you get to be an older person. Now, spirituality is also a good way to avoid depression. It makes you more resilient to physical problems. It makes you more resilient to depression, and it helps you live longer. Now, what kind of spirituality? Pick them, man. I'm not saying you have to be a Christian. I'm not saying you have to be a Muslim. I'm not saying you have to be Jewish or Hindi. But whatever spirituality you find is going to provide a health benefit in late adulthood. Now, as people get older, they tend to become more spiritual. They tend to start going to church more. They're more likely to say that religious faith is important to them than people who are younger. And believing somehow in a higher power is now more important at any time than any other time at life. And it turns out that you're going to see your females reporting more spirituality than their male partners. Oh, wow. I went through this much quicker than I thought. Does anyone have any questions about today's lecture? That probably is why Polish grandmas pray so much. Sounds to me like your grandma is awesome, Etta. She worked hard as a farmer. She goes to church. She probably eats well. I'll bet she's not stressed out, probably doesn't have money problems. And all of that stuff really kind of helps you at the end of life. Remember, the end of life is not as much your genes as it is your behavior. Eat your vegetables, eat fewer calories, exercise more. Make sure you engage in intellectual activities, and find a good sense of community at a church near you. And all of that stuff is really going to help provide protective factors as you move into late adulthood. I'm sorry, Etta. I'm sorry. Okay, folks, take care. Have a great day. Oh, I will see you tonight for Wednesday webinar. If you're going to come, make sure you watch the videos. And I'm talking to you, Leanne. Okay, don't fall asleep. Watch those videos and prepare for lecture tonight. And I'm so sorry, Etta. It's been a long time. Ashley, did you find a house you liked? I hope you found the house you liked. Bye. Take care, folks. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the broadcast. If you want to tell me about your house, sweet. Go ahead and send me a text and we'll talk about it offline. Everybody have a great day, and I'll see you tonight or next week.